for this arraignment in Washington, D.C. Of course, I want to give you a few LiveNOW looks as we continue to follow this there in Washington, D.C. You can just see the amount of people on the street, the amount of security, also at the E. Barrett Prettyman United States Courthouse there as well. We do see some supporters on the ground. You can see some in favor of Trump, some against Trump. So certainly a lot of activity on the ground right now. And I do want to bring in my colleague right now, Andrew Kraft, just to give us the details, because we saw him leave Bedminster earlier today, headed to Washington, D.C. Andrew Kraft, thank you so much for joining us here on LiveNOW. Where is Trump at now, and how close are we to this arraignment?
Yeah, Andy, thanks so much. So right now we're getting some notes from Fox's Department of Justice producer, who is right now inside of the courtroom. His name is Jake Gibson. He is saying, as of about 10 minutes ago, Trump has not entered yet. Remember, this arraignment is going to be taking place, we're told, right at the top of the hour, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific time. So according to Jake Gibson, he is reporting that Special Counsel Jack Smith, about 10 minutes ago, just entered the courtroom as well and sat down in the front row. So I do also want to get in as well. We're learning, according to sources familiar, telling Fox News Digital that former President Trump will plead not guilty to all counts, all 4 of those counts. And this is the same that we've seen in the last 2 indictments, Andy. Trump pleading not guilty in the course of the day throughout this arraignment.
All right, thank you so much. As we continue on, we'll bring you right in here with a legal expert in just a moment. But right now, I do want to get you right back out to the streets of Washington, D.C. as a attorney for the former president, not in this case in general, but also just an attorney. Let's listen into what she had to say outside of that courtroom earlier on LiveNOW.
Bringing this, I don't think Jack Smith really thought it through. There only has to be proof that, number one, President Trump believed that this election was not completely honest. And number two, Jack Smith has opened himself up to a can of worms that we can now look at and really examine.
If you believe that he's innocent and that this is all a setup, why not bring it to trial as soon as possible before the election so that you can clear his name?
Yeah, I would love to do that, but there's something called discovery. And when somebody wants to say that the 2020 election was perfect and that President Trump has no right to object to it, we've got to go show them all the facts. And there's a lot of facts to show. So everybody has their time. And to say that Donald Trump should then be rushed and not be given the same fair proceeding that anybody else is just, frankly, un-American. It's not fair. It's not the way our system works.
A lot of the lawyers who helped him try to overturn the election are unnamed co-conspirators in the indictment. Jenna Ellis isn't. Why do you think that is?
I'm not going to speak to co-conspirators or anybody else. I represent President Trump.
Let's go one more.
Alina, there are a number of, there's testimony and there's a number of aides that have said that the president was made aware that he lost the election and yet continued to argue that it was stolen from him. How do you reconcile those two things?
Well, I think that everybody was made aware that he lost the election, but that doesn't mean that that was the only advice he was given. As anybody understands what happens in the Oval Office, there are a numerous amount of advisors and politicians and lawyers, not just 1 or 2, that are giving you advice and telling you what they believe is true. So he may not agree with Mike Pence. He may not agree with one of his lawyers, but that doesn't mean that there weren't other people advising him exactly the opposite. And the president has a right, as every one of us do, to listen to several opinions and make their decision.
Yeah, I remember hearing Hillary Clinton and Stacey Abrams argue their elections were not right.
Absolutely.
I mean, how, and the weaponization of the DOJ didn't happen then.
No, of course not. But if your last name's Trump, it's very different. So Hillary Clinton could have a problem when she lost the election, and we could have a complete liberal meltdown, as we all saw. But when we have dignified disagreements, we take them to court. We say do things patriotically and peacefully. He's to blame for things that he did not himself do. And that's what we're seeing. Frankly, folks, this is not about that. This is about politics. This is about 2024. Period. The end.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right, you were just listening in there to a lawyer, not in this case, but for the former president there. We're now learning also that former President Trump has arrived at the courthouse and is in the courtroom there in Washington, D.C. This is a live picture right there. And we do want to bring in my colleague, Andrew Kraft, also legal expert, Randy Zellen. Thank you guys for joining us here as we continue to dive. Randy, I want to start with you first. Just break it down for us. What's going on? What's happening right now inside of that courtroom in Washington, D.C.?
Sure. What's going to happen is the judge is going to take the bench. The case is going to be called called. When the judge takes the bench, the parties will stand up. The case will be called United States versus Trump with the what we call the CR number or the case number or the docket number. And at that point, what will happen is there's a series of formalities. And some of them are kind of silly, but they are formalities. President Trump is there to be arraigned. That is a fancy way of saying, welcome to the criminal justice system, and let's talk about the initial entry of your plea, and let's talk about your release. So what will happen is the president will acknowledge that he's received a copy of the indictment. This will all be done through his lawyer. The president's counsel will acknowledge having received a copy of the indictment. The court or the court clerk will ask the defendant through his counsel, would you like me to read the indictment because you have a right to have it read to you, a public reading? He will say, no, we waive a public reading. And then at that point, it will be, how do you plead? We enter a plea of not guilty. And then there will be a discussion about his release. Of course, there will be no discussion. It's going to be released in his own recognizance, and the case will be continued for a status conference. And depending on whether or not the defendant, former President Trump, agrees to waive what we call the Speedy Trial Act. In other words, the government has 70 days from today, the date of the arraignment on his indictment, to take him to trial. If the former president wants to have conversations, he can agree to waive it. The judge can say, you know what, I'm taking the government off the clock because of discovery. And then, again, the case will be continued. But let me just say one thing, if you don't mind. What we just saw with that press conference is exactly why lawyers should think twice before they get in front of a microphone and in front of cameras. Say what you want about the proof, but how dare you call what happened at our Capitol on January 6th some dignified get-together? That is why you don't hold a press conference.
Okay, and Randy, just to stipulate, that was Alina Habba. Yep. She is kind of on the Trump legal team. She's not representing him in this case that we're talking about right now. She wasn't representing him either in Miami for the classified documents case as well. I do, though, Randy, I want to talk about lawyers. We're getting some more color from inside the courtroom, according to Jake Gibson, saying Trump entered the courtroom at 3:52 p.m. Eastern with his defense attorneys, John Lauro and Todd Blanche. Trump is wearing a blue suit and a red tie. He's sitting at the defense table now talking with Blanche. Also in attendance, defense attorney Evan Corcoran is in the front row, now sitting at the defense table. And so they were signing some documents that Blanche passed Trump. I want to talk about some of these attorneys. We were talking with Doug Burns yesterday. He used to work with John Lauro in the Eastern District of New York. You have told us in the past that you have crossed paths with Todd Blanche. So kind of outline what their defense is going to be. John Lauro has been on a lot of news networks, talking about kind of what the strategy is going forward. It seems like they are going full steam ahead with the free speech defense, does it not?
Well, I mean, to me, that's really not what does it. What does it here, and in the backdrop of criminal cases and the government's ability to prove a criminal case, invariably requires the government to prove that the defendant had knowledge that what he or she was doing was breaking the law, and that the defendant intended to break the law, intended the nature of his or her consequences. President Trump's defense, there's no rocket science right here. If I believed that I lost or that I didn't lose the election, I haven't lost my mind. And even if you think I lost my mind, that's okay too. It's not a crime to lose my mind. It's not a crime to be unreasonable. If President Trump believed that that election was stolen, that it was rigged, and that he had won that election, then the government is not going to be able to prove that President Trump knew that what he was doing was breaking the law and that he intended to break the law. And the nice thing about that defense is that nobody knows what goes on inside of someone's brain except for that person. Of course, the flip side to that coin is if you can find evidence that the defendant in fact did know that he or she knew what he or she was doing. And in this particular instance, that the president knew that he had lost the election and now is creating this construct, this virtual reality, and getting these people to do all of these things for him. If you find someone who can say, yes, I was in the room, of course, President Trump acknowledged that he lost, or you found some other evidence, text messages, emails, another witness saying, yes, we talked about it, then say goodbye to the defense of, I truly believed that I had done nothing wrong.
Of course, Randy, and obviously those are some very strong points of my colleague making a point about lawyers, but also you mentioned, I think the quote maybe, when did he know it? What information did he know and when did he know it? Also a point of it. I do want to just bring our viewers maybe a little bit back here as we're inside the courtroom. All these proceedings are taking place, but this was the scene earlier here as we were watching him land in Washington, D.C. You can see the Trump plane land there as well, and him also on the tarmac. But President Trump, he's been at several indictments in New York, in Florida, now in Washington, D.C. You can see him kind of be stoic there, walking off the plane, his plane there in Washington, D.C. at Reagan National Airport. But certainly this arraignment taking place, they're pleading not guilty, according to our Fox News digital team. He didn't necessarily have to be there in person, correct? This is almost a decision that Trump made entirely on his own to be there, correct? That he didn't have to necessarily be there in person.
It is all part of a public relations campaign. It is all part of playing to the former president's base, playing to Republican voters or prospective Republican voters, because the new mantra is, I'm doing this for you. I did all of this for you. They are doing this not to me, they are doing this to you. So why then would I show up in court virtually when I can go through the pomp, circumstance, or the humiliation, the degradation, the horror of walking into a courthouse, walking into a courtroom, standing in front of a judge, having to enter a plea of not guilty. That visual, those sound bites, that entire scripting it's raw meat for the MAGA base.
Yeah, and we are, Randy, getting into some of those political questions and considerations. I thought that was also interesting as well. He put on Truth Social today, I'm being arrested for you. Time and again, we see this kind of martyrology or victimization that he, assumes that role for his supporters. And like you said, it works for his supporters. But those are some of those political questions there. It kind of reminds me of when he was on the campaign trail some months ago where he said, I am your retribution. Let's get back, though, into some of the legal questions, as well. And you were kind of getting into what Jack Smith and his team are going to have to prove about his state of mind, before the January 6th Capitol riot, after the January 6th Capitol riot, about proving whether or not he knew he lost the 2020 election. You were alluding to the fact that Smith and his team are going to rely on maybe some of these other unindicted co-conspirators, witnesses, people in the former president's orbit who said as much to him that he did not win the 2020 election. But does Jack Smith and his team need it from the horse's mouth, from Donald Trump? I'm kind of alluding to the famous film A Few Good Men, Jack Nicholson in court. He says, I ordered the code red. Does Jack Smith and his team need that from Trump for a successful prosecution?
In this particular instance, with the stakes being as high as they are, with 75 million people having voted for President Trump, for President Trump's entire, again, campaign being one of that this is trying to get rid of your favorite president, trying to get rid of the front runner, trying to take out the guy who rightfully should be holding that office. I would respectfully submit that the answer, in a very long-winded way, is yes. Jack Smith is going to need a witness or witnesses who are going to be able to raise their right hand put their hand on a Bible and say, I swear to God, the president knew that he had lost this election, and here's why I am saying that. Listen, if Jack Smith calls Bill Barr, and Bill Barr actually says, yes, the president knew that he lost the election, as he has been saying on television, and now says, here's how and here's why I am saying that. If any one of these unindicted co-conspirators want to save their own necks, his or her own neck, and decides to join Team America, I can assure you that bargain will include providing evidence that, in fact, President Trump acknowledged, he said, he behaved, he acted in a manner consistent with knowing full well that he had lost the election, that it was not stolen, and it was not rigged.
Yeah, and going off that exact point, you talked about the co-conspirators in this, and Donald Trump is the only defendant here indicted, and potentially that could change. Would that be a reason that Jack Smith, a special counsel, would leave maybe those co-conspirators off this indictment initially, knowing that that could come down the road?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think that this was absolutely strategic on Jack Smith's part. I think the reason why there was a delay in this indictment being handed up or handed down, depending on who you talk to, is because Jack Smith was hoping that he could get any one of those 6 unindicted co-conspirators to agree to flip on President Trump. That hasn't happened, apparently. And now he's now saying, okay, here's one more chance to save yourself. Now I'm going to make it a little bit more uncomfortable for you. I'm going to raise the heat in the room. Let's see if you can tolerate it. So now I'm going to indict the former president, and I'm going to make it clear as day who the 6 unindicted co-conspirators are, because we sure as hell know who 5 of them are. It's easy. You don't even have to think about who the 5 are, and you can do it in sequential order.
Okay.
And those 5, are they sweating right now? And are they thinking about, do I want to spend, particularly those who are up there in years, do I want to face the potential of coming out of prison feet first? Am I prepared to spend my remaining days doing nothing except paying for my lawyers, going in and out of court, sweating what's going to happen to me? Or do I want to save myself? And for those who are not on the tail end of their lives, do I want this to be my legacy, my children's legacy,
Sure.
my grandchildren's legacy? Is this how I want to spend the rest of my life?
Yeah, and just to the point on these unindicted co-conspirators, of which there are 6, there's been a lot of reporting and some speculation, well, most speculation about who they are. People have kind of used the process of elimination and, after they have read the indictment, to kind of narrow down who they think these, co-conspirators could be. And to Andy's point, it'll be interesting to see if whether or not they, leave the unindicted designation and become indicted. We also got a statement in from the attorney of John Eastman a couple of days ago saying that they believe that his client, John Eastman, is one of these unindicted co-conspirators. I guess my question, Randy, though, before I give more kind of commentary and color from what is going on inside the courtroom. My question is, do the unindicted co-conspirators know they are the unindicted co-conspirators?
Hell yes. I can't say it any clearer. I could go on for another 10 minutes, but the answer is hell yes.
Okay. I just want to, we're getting more reporting from inside the courtroom. Apparently the judge is still not in the courtroom after 14 minutes after both parties have gotten in there. We are learning now that Trump has been seated at the defense table with his lawyers for about 20 minutes. The judge has not yet entered the courtroom. The former president is talking with his attorneys. This is from inside the courtroom from our Fox producers there, saying at times he's seated with his hands clasped, occasionally tapping them on the table, glancing around the room. He's being described by some of our producers as stoic, but also the interaction or lack thereof of Jack Smith and Donald Trump. We're being told Smith is looking ahead, not in Trump's direction. He's talking to his own staff. Trump has looked over a few times at Jack Smith. Now, I want to kind of just juxtapose that with when they last saw each other. in the federal courthouse back in Miami in early June, we were told that Jack Smith did not make eye contact with Donald Trump the entire time they were in the courtroom. Can you kind of offer some details about the special prosecutor who brought this case? The defendant is literally sitting right next to them. It's tense, is it not?
It's tense, but what you don't want to do, you don't want to be accused as a prosecutor of being intimidating. You don't want to be accused of gloating. And certainly looking at a defendant can be misconstrued, or maybe it can be properly construed. So the professional, the ethical, and the appropriate thing to do as a prosecutor is just to stare straight ahead. It's a very, very interesting dynamic that goes on in the courtroom. And I will tell you, I pride myself on having good relationships with prosecutors. And it's not personal. And I do that really because I always want the lines of communication to be kept open because it inures to the client's benefit. But you'd be amazed that when you're in a courtroom, and I've learned this the hard way, the last thing your client wants to see you do is engaging in banter, in talking to a prosecutor. It's like, wait a minute, whose side are you on? That person that you're talking to wants me to go to jail, and you're talking about the Mets and the sell-off, and you're talking about whether the Yankees are going to come back, or what the weather looks like, or what you're doing this weekend. So much of what we do as lawyers it's about appearance, and it's about optics. It's not necessarily about reality. It is, what does it appear to the client? What does it appear to the public? That's where we talk about even the appearance of an impropriety. There may not be an actual impropriety, but even if it looks like it, that's not cool.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting statement. There's obviously just the reporting going on, and you get these bits and pieces inside of the federal courthouse, because that is different than a state courthouse or something where you could get a camera inside there. This is not the case. Of course, my colleague Andrew Crouch has told me that the judge has now entered the courtroom. Randy Zella, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to keep going with this coverage here. We're going to dive back into our Fox 5 team. Excuse me, they are, I believe, talking about weather, so we're not going to go to them just yet. So that's what happens with local news. But I do want to put up just some pictures here as we continue on. You can see the courthouse right there as we continue to follow this story. Of course, we're also talking about other people within Donald Trump's circle. We saw yesterday the VP